Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Sam Jensen, and this is an introduction lecture that I generally give in my general chemistry class for the second semester. Usually in my classes, I have a bit of a TED talk on science education. And so this is my second semester talk. I've kind of slightly updated this. The impetus of this particular talk is I got a teacher evaluation comment a while back about how the student just wanted science and not my social commentary on things, which I kind of realized was you miss the point of a science class if you think that it's just supposed to be about sterile facts about elements and memorizing periodic table information. That part of our reason why we do science, or a big chunk of why we do science, is to learn about the world around us and to develop things that help us as people. So the title for this talk is Science Informing Our World. And so I'm going to take my camera off here because I think a lot of the graphics do better without my face messing it up. So science helps us to learn about our world, empowering us to make better choices for ourselves, others, and the planet. More than 2 billion people worldwide face micronutrient deficiencies. Vitamin A, for example, can result in visual and ocular malfunctions, such as night blindness and xerophthalmia. It can reduce immune responsiveness, which can increase instances and severity of respiratory infections. Fortified rice there in the upper corner is often called golden rice, and it's fortified with vitamin A, and it has the potential to drastically improve the health outcomes of millions of people around the world. Malaria is a mosquito-borne disease, and it kills hundreds of thousands of people every year. By genetically engineering mosquitoes that pass on genes where females die before adulthood, we can drastically impact the spread of multiple diseases: West Nile, Zika, malaria, dengue, yellow fever. 9 million people worldwide suffer from type 1 diabetes. It requires management with insulin. By shifting from using animal byproduct insulin, extracted from a pancreas, to a genetically modified yeast that produces human insulin, we drastically improve the clinical efficacy and health outcomes of people suffering from type 1 diabetes. Carl Sagan talked a lot about the future and our understanding of science, and his musings were often prophetic. Science is more than just a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking. As a scientist, I've done science for longer than I've done anything else in my life. It's not just a job. It becomes kind of who we are. We look to connect all these bits of information to understand things and how they relate to one another. Ultimately, to extract that information to make the world a better place. Science is about critically analyzing phenomena and digging deeper into why and how things do what they do. Critical thinking is a way that we methodically evaluate claims and beliefs. These two things work synergistically to help us reach ideas and beliefs and understandings of things that are compatible with evidence and reality. Critical thinking is an important facet here because many of the things we already believe or are raised with have to be continually challenged against the current and best understanding of the world. Change is constant. And if we don't continually evaluate the things that we believe are true, then we inadvertently operate in a void of fantasy, where we're seeking answers and solutions to problems that don't exist, except maybe in our heads. And the first, probably best example of how we need to reevaluate things based on new evidence is, for example, our first picture, the black hole. We previously only had evidence about black holes from how they interact with the surrounding space. Our ability to image them expands our ability to study these phenomena that were once invisible and enigmatic. We can gather information about how gravity works and can continue to expand and test Einstein's theory of general relativity. Ultimately, black holes may help us to understand the origin of the universe, the nature of space and time. This pulls back the veil of ignorance and expands our understanding of how cosmic bodies work and how these interrelated things form and change over time. Our ability to take evidence and make predictive models helps us to act for the future, not just for the right now. We know for a fact that climate change is directly caused by our use of fossil fuels and that humans contribute to the rising CO2 in the atmosphere. We have made policy changes in the past and have changed the course of events. And then we have to update our models based on the outcome of those policies. These things take years to monitor and evaluate how the changes we made affect the world around us. Sadly, climate change is becoming a fact that we cannot stop it. But what we can do now is work to ameliorate the impact. We have to act now. But sadly, people in our government in charge of making policies are all over the age of 60. And by the time the more severe effects of climate change begin to impact you, they will be dead. You have to take charge of the future. You can't rely on the boomers and the Gen Xers to act in your best interest. Unfortunately, if we take current events into account, it becomes abundantly clear that they don't really care about you. And our short-sightedness is going to leave you in a position where turning back the tide is going to be impossible. Some slightly disturbing pictures of disease. I apologize. Our first evidence of smallpox dates back to 1500 BCE. It's estimated that in the 100 years before the vaccine, smallpox killed between 300 and 500 million people. The picture on the bottom right is a real picture of two boys infected at the same time, except one was vaccinated and the other was not. The unvaccinated boy still had a few pustules and fever and malaise, but his outcome was vastly better. In 1980, the World Health Organization declared smallpox eradicated. Smallpox is the first example of a disease being wiped out of existence because of science. Before the polio vaccine, polio crippled or killed more than 500,000 people a year, mostly children. Polio is on the verge of a similar eradication. It's currently only endemic in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The longer we wait and the longer we allow it to propagate, the higher the risk of reemergence in other countries as vaccine rates drop. Unfortunately, our own arrogance and hubris of using vaccine distributions as a cover for espionage significantly damaged our ability to reach vulnerable populations, and thus through our own actions have allowed this disease to continue longer than it should have. 100 years ago, we had another pandemic, except then it was swine flu. It killed between 20 and 50 million people worldwide, and about the same time as COVID has killed 7. We have vaccines for flu. We update them every year. They're used we take on the most predominant strains. And while highly effective, people can still get the flu, but the point is that it reduces the duration and severity of the illness regardless, which is a massive economic savings, as well as a reduction in the suffering of people on an annual basis. Anti-vaxxers would love to go back to the good old days of where 2.6 million children died every year of measles, which is one of the most contagious diseases known to man. In recent years, we've begun to see as much as a 40% increase in deaths due to measles, which unfortunately is disproportionately affecting low-income countries that are also being affected by COVID. Health disparities and inequality will continue to drastically impact countries that cannot get access to the vaccines they need. So while we are a first world country and are privileged enough to ignore science and reality, the direct impact to the rest of the world will continue to grow. And like it or not, we are partly responsible for the suffering of others. I'm going to continue with the health aspects of science because it's one of the most impactful ways that people can see tangible outcomes of our scientific advancements. For some context about the impact of science, you don't really have to look much further than the metrics on life expectancy. At the beginning of the 20th century, the life expectancy for a person in the US was 47 years old. At the end of the 20th century, it was 78 years old. This is a drastic expansion of human life and well-being. It is directly because of our advances in science. Vaccines were one of the most impactful public health advances in centuries. We save at least 4 million people a year because of vaccines. The economic impact alone is beyond phenomenal. We save $52 in treatment for every $1 we spend on prevention of illness. 100 years ago, deaths due to bacterial infection were at the rate of 247 people per 100,000. In 2002, the death rate was 38 per 100,000, which is an order of magnitude different. We continue to develop therapeutics of all kinds for illnesses that affect billions of people. Almost as important are advances of diagnostics. Our ability to determine what is causing illness is advancing so that we can tailor treatments that have a more efficacious outcome. We're currently developing assays and analytical tests to determine if you have a viral or bacterial infection, which you might think is obvious that we should be able to do, but it's more technically challenging than you think. Not knowing the difference over influences things like prescription of antibiotics, which doesn't do anything if it's a virus and impacts our global issues of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Our diagnostic capacity has had a massive impact on our mental health as well. Because while we are seeing increased prevalence of mental health issues, the reason is because we are better able to detect and diagnose previously underrepresented health disparities. So no, people are not more depressed or anxious than in the past. You think people are more depressed than people who lived through 2 world wars? No, we're just better able to diagnose things. We are not seeing increased rates of autism because of insert nonsense reason. No, we understand things like spectrums of these things and are better able to diagnose that people land in varying degrees of that spectrum, which is natural. But if you count just raw numbers, it looks like there's more people living with autism. But this goes hand in hand with many other mental health issues that people leave out the context for. There's more people living now. There's more people living longer now. And so when you use percentages of people who are with mental health, struggling with mental health issues, it has the apparent effect of looking like we're more mentally ill now because of insert whatever reason. Technology, video games, whatever you want to name it. But what we have is a natural human diversity of our issues that have always likely existed. We just didn't diagnose them well because we couldn't detect them well. With the information we gather through experimentation and observation, we can make predictions and policies for governance that help make our society healthier and happier overall. The general public doesn't have the education it needs to be independent or individualistic in a 21st century world. We need to rely on experts to use the best evidence available to make recommendations for people to help us navigate the overwhelming amount of information. This is why your continued science education is necessary and why we have to teach critical thinking and live critical thinking skills, because you now have to wade through the overwhelming amounts of information. I'm going to shift a little focus to some other issues around the world, which, again, for many people, if you're not aware, there are many other countries that are not the United States. Technology we need to be developing to reduce the future effects of climate change is an all hands on deck suite of clean energy that includes things like nuclear. People don't often get to hear from real scientists tell them that we need nuclear technology. The future of energy cannot be done without it. Period. Full stop. We need to engage in more genetic engineering of plants to have them adapt to the changing environment. As climate shifts, we're going to see shifting water patterns, which will include droughts and more powerful storms. Plants will need to grow in the face of these changes. The world population is not decreasing, and with 7 billion people, many of whom already face food scarcity issues, we're going to need to take some drastic changes to accommodate these facts. While we are looking at things like boosting the ability of plants to uptake carbon dioxide, many of our solutions need to be started now, not down the road. The Clean Air Act was probably one of the most successful policies in American history that affected the outcome of pollution in our cities. We had issues of smog in many cities due to pollution and car emissions. After the evidence was evaluated and policies were recommended, we changed fuel content of cars and created regulations for emissions, which impacted the overall air quality for tens of millions of people. Many people have probably heard about the depletion of the ozone layer was a big issue when I was growing up. But we engaged in a worldwide effort to curb emissions and the use of some chemicals identified as the most hazardous to the ozone. So we averted an environmental crisis. So we have evidence that we as a global community can come together and act on environmental issues and have a positive impact. Tackling global climate change can be done the same way, but it requires that we act now. It requires sustained effort and leadership across the global community of diverse countries. Delaying and fostering animosity with world partners while sitting back and not participating as a leader with other first world nations is unconscionable. Our use of science and evidence and modern conservation techniques have helped us to keep some species from going extinct. We have managed to reintroduce species to ecosystems that have previously been damaged due to hunting, deforestation, and human encroachment into habitats. These balances have to be done with care and using the best evidence available, not simply introducing foreign species into an environment so that they too become invasive species that we have to deal with. I've seen people say, well, we shouldn't really do anything, but we already have. Our behavior has already changed things. But saying, oh, we shouldn't act now is not the right way to correct the mistakes of the past, nor approach the future. Humans have always changed things around us. It is what we naturally do, but we have to do it smartly, with the best evidence possible, through sustained conservation and management. What is the point of all this science? Why do we care about making the world a better place? Why can't we just do a science class where we read the periodic table and memorize molecular weights of elements? The purpose of working to better understand the world around us is to maximize human well-being and flourishing. This is what morality means. It's not simply about right and wrong. It's about the right and wrong way to flourish physically, mentally, and socially as people. Science is a tool that can help us discern not just what is healthy for us as people from a physical perspective, but we can recognize patterns and behaviors and improve our feelings of worth and community. It is a scientific fact that humans are a diverse and adaptable species. Recognizing that diversity is a strength that allows us to take our different perspectives and apply them to solving problems is how we as a species will advance. Recognizing our diversity means accepting that solutions we have to problems need to be intersection. No one can possibly think that your individual medical needs are going to be the same as anyone else. Some drugs are metabolized in the body differently based on very slight genetic differences. So we have to tailor treatments based on these things. Just like in education, many of you don't learn the same way or at the same speed, but that doesn't mean you're any less capable or have any less potential to flourish. My friend Charlotte, who has Down syndrome, put it poetically that the more we see people for their abilities and to make inclusion our default, the more likely we are to promote flourishing. This is a good segue into dealing with other hard facts that need our combined abilities to overcome. It is a fact that there are increasing forms of inequality at all levels of society. I'm not making subjective judgments here, but the cause or approach to correcting this. I'm simply stating objective facts that we know from evidence. Denial of the existence of inequality across racial, gender, or social groups is a foundation of bigotry. Inequality causes suffering. And if you're not voting, then you are saying you're okay with the status quo, which is inequality and suffering. As adults, you rarely have good choices in things. But importantly, you have to learn that you are both morally responsible for the actions you take and those you don't. It isn't all doom and gloom. We have the power to change the world for the better. In getting an education, learning about science, and importantly, how that scientific knowledge can impact you and the world around you, you can be the change you want to see in the world. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us. But with our combined diversity of thought, we can work to find materials that are cheaper, lighter, stronger, and more amenable to being produced cheaply that make things more equitable and accessible to everyone. We have to be the ones to seek out the knowledge and help others who don't have the moral luck or the privilege to have time to devote to learning things. Our path ahead is not just about making new things, but about optimizing the things we do now, improving the conditions that exist currently with the resources we have. We cannot continue to pretend that naturalistic fallacies are a real argument. And we have to be realistic about how we weigh risks, because there's never a free lunch, but we shouldn't be naive to think that things are just going to fix themselves, or that some fantasy reality of a bygone era of the past is something we ought to get back to. Pretending that problems don't exist will never solve real problems. And in the meantime, the people who are suffering from real problems will continue to suffer. The purpose of science is to expand our understanding of reality, ultimately to make the world a better place and improve the lives of people. The purpose of critical thinking is to use rational thought and inquiry to challenge our beliefs and strive to have our beliefs comport with reality. Your education is not simply about making money. And education is meant to help us grow as individuals and make us better people. This course is meant to broaden your understanding of many fundamental things of chemistry, but also to tie this knowledge to the real world. You are on the right path, but education is not a course, it's not a degree, it's something we pursue our entire lives. And we have to make science and critical thinking a part of our lives every day, because these are tools that help us to navigate the world. Yeah, I always like to leave people with a little extra. If you're continuing your education beyond the class, these are books that I highly recommend that are essential reading. The James Randi book is probably a little harder to come by. It's a little older, but all of the stuff in that book is stuff that we see repackaged and regurgitated as new pseudoscientific fads that come up every time. They just change some of the words around, but it's the same thing that we deal with all the time. If reading's not your thing, well, there's podcasts I recommend, right? These are ones that I listen to. These are probably some of the best science communication you're going to find on the internet. They're a great thing to catch up on, to keep up with current events, to expand your breadth of science knowledge in a variety of subjects. And so with that, I will leave you here and wish you all the best. See you guys in class.